The phone rang a second time. Bumpy picked up, didn't say hello, just waited. "Mr. Johnson." The voice was crisp, professional, white, not New York accent, somewhere Midwest, maybe. "My name isn't important. What's important is that I work for people who need your help." "I don't help people I don't know. You know us. You just don't know you know us. We're the people who've been very interested in your Havana connections for the past 3 years." Bumpy sat up straighter. Havana. Nobody had mentioned Havana to him in a long time, not since Castro took over in 1959 and Bumpy lost $2 million in operations overnight. "You got 30 seconds, Bumpy said. "We need information about Cuba, troop movements, supply routes, missile site locations. We know you maintained relationships there after the revolution. We need you to make some calls." "And why would I do that?" "Because this is a matter of national security, and because we can make certain problems of yours disappear." What happened over the next 72 hours would connect a Harlem street kingpin to the most dangerous moment in human history. It would prove that power doesn't just flow through governments and militaries. Sometimes it flows through unexpected channels, through people who exist in the shadows, through relationships built on trust rather than treaties. And it would show that Bumpy Johnson's network didn't just control Harlem. It reached all the way to Havana. And in October 1962, that made him one of the most valuable assets the United States government had. To understand why the CIA called Bumpy Johnson during the Cuban Missile Crisis, you need to understand his history with Cuba. It started in 1946, right after World War II ended. Havana was the playground of America. Casinos, nightclubs, shows, gambling. All of it controlled by American mobsters working with the Batista government. Meyer Lansky ran most of it. He was the mob's financial genius, the man who turned organized crime into a corporation. And Lansky understood something that most of his associates didn't. Cuba was going to be bigger than Las Vegas, closer to the US, beautiful weather, fewer legal restrictions, the perfect place to build an empire. But Lansky had a problem. The casinos needed entertainment, high-quality entertainment that would bring in the tourists. And the best entertainers in America were black. But if you brought black performers to Cuba, you needed someone who could manage the relationships, handle the logistics, make sure everything ran smoothly in a foreign country. That's where Bumpy came in. Lansky approached him in 1946 with a proposal. Help bring black entertainers to Havana, set up the infrastructure, handle the accommodations, the transportation, the protection. In return, Bumpy got a percentage of the casino operations, not ownership. Lansky wasn't offering that, but a generous cut of the profits. Bumpy agreed, not because he loved Lansky or the mob, but because it was good business, and because it gave him international reach, connections outside New York, leverage that other Harlem operators didn't have. For the next 13 years, Bumpy ran operations in Havana. He set up a network. Cuban partners who handled local logistics, club owners who hosted the shows, government officials who made sure the right permits got approved and the wrong questions didn't get asked. Bumpy flew to Havana 4-5 times a year, stayed at the Riviera Hotel, met with his contacts, made sure everything ran smoothly. And he built real relationships, not just business transactions. He learned Spanish. He ate at local restaurants, not just tourist spots. He remembered people's names, their families, their birthdays. That was Bumpy's genius. He didn't treat people as assets. He treated them as partners. And people remembered that. Then came 1959. Fidel Castro. The revolution. Batista fled. The casino shut down overnight. The American mobsters lost everything. Lansky lost tens of millions. The whole Cuban operation collapsed. Bumpy lost $2 million in investments and future earnings. But unlike the other Americans, Bumpy didn't lose his relationships. Because when Castro took over, Bumpy's Cuban partners didn't disappear. They didn't get executed or exiled. Most of them stayed. Some joined the revolution. Some just kept their heads down and survived. And they remembered Bumpy, remembered that he'd treated them with respect, remembered that he'd paid fairly. remembered that he'd kept his word. So when Bumpy called them after the revolution to check if they were okay, they answered. And when Bumpy asked if they needed anything, some of them said yes. Bumpy quietly helped a few of his former partners get money out of Cuba, helped their families relocate to Miami or New York if they wanted. Not all of them. He couldn't save everyone, but the ones he could help, he did. And that loyalty, that relationship maintenance, that's what made Bumpy valuable to the CIA in October 1962. Because when Soviet ships started arriving in Cuba with missiles, the US government needed intelligence. They needed to know where the missiles were being placed, how many troops were on the ground, what the supply routes looked like. And their usual intelligence methods weren't working fast enough. The CIA had assets in Cuba, of course, but Castro's counterintelligence was good. The CIA's networks had been compromised. They needed information from sources the Cubans wouldn't suspect, from people who had no official connection to the US government. That's when someone in the CIA's Cuba division remembered Bumpy Johnson, remembered that he'd run operations in Havana for 13 years, remembered that he'd maintained relationships there even after Castro took over, remembered that organized crime figures sometimes had better intelligence networks than governments. So they made the call. 11:47 p.m., October 22nd, 1962. 3 hours after Kennedy's address to the nation, 12 days into the crisis. Bumpy listened to the proposal. The voice on the phone, CIA operative, though he never confirmed it, laid it out clearly. They needed information. They needed it fast, and they were willing to make it worth Bumpy's while. "What problems of mine disappear?" Bumpy asked. "Your parole restrictions. Currently, you can't leave the state without permission. That gets lifted. Your passport application that's been sitting in bureaucratic limbo for 2 years, that gets approved. And the IRS audit on your wife's businesses. That goes away." Bumpy thought about it. The parole restrictions had been frustrating him for years. Every time he wanted to travel, he had to ask permission like a child. The passport issue was worse. He couldn't leave the country even if he wanted to. And the IRS audit on Mamie's real estate holdings, that was just harassment. They hadn't found anything illegal because there wasn't anything illegal to find, but they kept digging anyway. "And if I say no, then we keep looking for other sources. But Mr. Johnson, I'm going to be direct with you. The president believes we're 12 days away from nuclear war, maybe less. If we can get better intelligence, we make better decisions. Better decisions mean less chance of miscalculation, less chance of war. So I'm not just offering you a deal. I'm asking for your help preventing the end of the world." Bumpy almost laughed. The end of the world. Dramatic. But after watching Kennedy's speech, after seeing the fear in people's faces on the street, after hearing the radio reports about Soviet ships steaming toward Cuba, maybe it wasn't that dramatic. "I need guarantees in writing." "Impossible. This conversation never happened. But I can tell you this. The people I work for keep their word. If you deliver what we need, the problems I mentioned disappear within 30 days. You have my word." "Your word means nothing to me." "Then you have the word of the organization I represent. An organization that has successfully kept commitments to difficult partners for 17 years. 17 years. The CIA had been founded in 1947. So this man was confirming, without confirming, that he represented the agency. And he was right about one thing. The CIA had worked with organized crime before. Operation Underworld during World War II. The waterfront security operations with Lucky Luciano. The agency knew how to work with people like Bumpy. "I'll make the calls," Bumpy said, "but I need 48 hours. "You got 24. Bumpy hung up. Sat in his apartment for 10 minutes thinking. Then he started making calls. First call went to Miami. A Cuban exile named Roberto Herrera, who'd been Bumpy's partner in Havana, ran 3 clubs before the revolution. Roberto got out in 1960. Moved to Miami. Opened a restaurant. But his brother was still in Havana. Still had connections. "Roberto, it's Bumpy." "Bumpy, long time. How are you?" "I need a favor. A big one. I need information from Havana. About the Soviet presence, troop numbers, locations, supply routes. Silence on the line. Then, that's dangerous information to ask for. I know, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Can your brother get it? Maybe. Why do you need it? Because someone who can make both our lives easier asked me for it. And because if this situation goes wrong, there won't be a Miami or a Havana or anywhere else to worry about. Roberto was quiet for a moment. I'll call my brother. Give me 6 hours. Second call went to New York. A Cuban doctor named Carlos Mendez, who'd moved to Harlem in 1961, worked at Harlem Hospital, but his sister was married to a Cuban military officer. Mid-level guy, nothing important, but he had access to information. Carlos, I need to ask you something that might put your family at risk. What is it? Bumpy explained. Carlos listened without interrupting. When Bumpy finished, Carlos said, My sister's husband. He's not a revolutionary. He's a career military man. He serves whoever's in charge. But he's not blind. He sees what's happening. The Soviet troops, the missiles. He's worried. So is my sister. Can he get information out? Maybe, through my sister. She writes letters. Careful letters. But letters. Give me 12 hours. Third call went to someone Bumpy hadn't spoken to in 3 years. A woman named Luz Morales. She'd been a club manager in Havana, one of Bumpy's key partners. Smart. Fearless. She'd stayed in Cuba after the revolution, worked in Castro's tourism ministry. Bumpy had heard she was disillusioned, but he didn't know if she'd help. Luz, it's Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson, I thought you forgot about me. Never. I need your help. With what? I need information about the Soviet presence in Cuba, and I need it in the next 24 hours. That's a death sentence if I get caught. I know. That's why I'm asking, not demanding. If you can't do it, I understand. Luz was quiet. Then, what's this for? Who wants this information? People who can stop this situation from becoming a war. The Americans. Yes. And what do I get? Money. A lot of it. And if you want to leave Cuba, I can arrange that. I don't want to leave. This is my home. But I want something else. I want your word that if my family ever needs to leave, you'll help them. Not just money. Real help. Safety. You have my word. Then I'll see what I can do. No promises. But I'll try. Over the next 18 hours, information started coming in. Roberto's brother called from Havana. He talked to dock workers, truck drivers, people who saw the Soviet equipment coming in. He had numbers, not exact but estimates. 3,000 Soviet troops, maybe more. Missile sites near San Cristobal, another near Sagua La Grande, supply routes running through specific roads. Carlos's brother-in-law got information through his sister. More detailed. Soviet troop positions, the types of missiles, short range and medium range, the command structure, names of Soviet officers. Luz came through with the most valuable information. She still had access to government buildings, still saw documents. She provided details about supply chains, which ships brought which equipment, where materials were being stored. Flight patterns for Soviet aircraft. Bumpy compiled everything. Wrote it down carefully. Then he made the call. The number the CIA operative had left. This is Johnson. I have what you need. Go ahead. Bumpy read off the information. The operative didn't interrupt, didn't ask how Bumpy got it, just listened. When Bumpy finished, there was silence. Then, this is valuable, very valuable. Can you verify any of it? My sources are reliable. That's all I can tell you. Understood. Stay by the phone. Someone might need clarification. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. Different voice. Higher rank. Bumpy could tell by the authority in the tone. Mr. Johnson, your information corroborates what we're seeing from other sources. It fills in significant gaps. On behalf of the people I represent. Thank you. The deal we discussed will be honored. 30 days. You have my word. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended 13 days after it began. October 28, 1962. Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles. Kennedy agreed not to invade Cuba and to remove American missiles from Turkey. The world stepped back from the edge. How much did Bumpy's information contribute? No one can say for certain. The intelligence went into a larger pool, got analyzed alongside satellite photos, intercepted communications, CIA field reports. But people who were in the room later said that having ground-level intelligence from sources the Soviets and Cubans didn't know about gave Kennedy confidence in his decisions. 3 weeks later, Bumpy received a letter from the New York State Parole Board. His travel restrictions were lifted, effective immediately. 2 weeks after that, his passport arrived, approved without explanation. The IRS audit on Mamie's business is closed. No findings, no penalties, just a letter saying the review was complete. Bumpy never spoke about his role in the Cuban Missile Crisis, not to his associates, not to Mamie, though she noticed the sudden resolution of his legal problems, not to anyone. That was part of the deal. The conversation never happened. But in certain circles, in certain rooms where decisions about national security were made, people knew. They knew that when the world was on the brink, when traditional intelligence channels weren't enough, they'd reached out to someone who existed outside the system, and that person had delivered. Years later, in 1997, 35 years after the crisis, a former CIA officer named Richard Helms gave an interview. He was asked about unconventional intelligence sources during the Cold War. He smiled and said, "We worked with whoever could help us. Sometimes that meant people who'd never stepped foot in Langley. Sometimes the best intelligence came from the most unexpected places." When asked to elaborate, he declined, but people who knew the history understood what he meant. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, 6 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He never knew that his contribution had been noted, filed away, remembered. But his legacy wasn't just in Harlem. It wasn't just in the streets he controlled or the people he protected. His legacy was also in the invisible moments, the phone calls that prevented disasters, the networks that reached across borders, the relationships built on trust that could be activated when the world needed them most. October 22nd, 1962. A CIA operative called a Harlem gangster at midnight, and that gangster helped prevent nuclear war. Not because he was patriotic, not because he loved his government, but because it was good business, because the problems he wanted solved got solved, and because sometimes, when the stakes are high enough, even the most unlikely people choose the right side. That's the Bumpy Johnson nobody talks about. Not the enforcer, not the crime boss, but the man whose network spanned continents, the man who could make calls to Havana when the CIA couldn't, the man who understood that power doesn't just come from controlling your block. It comes from maintaining relationships everywhere. If this story showed you a side of history you never knew existed, hit that subscribe button. We're telling the stories that connect street power to world events, the moments where organized crime and national security intersected in ways nobody talks about. Drop a like if you understand that sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones nobody knows about. And in the comments, let me know, would you have helped the CIA if you were Bumpy? Would you have taken that risk? Turn on notifications because next time, we're covering what happened when Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz after 11 years and found the man who betrayed him eating dinner at his table. What Bumpy did next became the most talked about night in Harlem history. Remember, power doesn't just exist in Washington or Moscow. Sometimes it exists at Table 7 in Small's Paradise, and sometimes that power saves the world.